4-time Emmy Award-winning producer, Frank Pace, and retired New York City firefighter, 9/11 first responder, and Vietnam vet, Billy O'Connor. Brought to you by We Can Coffee Company, manufacturer of freshly roasted premium coffee blends delivered directly to your door. This week's guest, nationally known mixed martial arts writer, Grant Gordon.
My brother.
Frank, my brother, how are you doing, type pal? How's everything with you?
It's okay.
You ain't hitting the little white ball, huh?
No, not really. Not really. I'll probably go up to Pebble Beach probably fairly soon and maybe try to hit the little white ball.
But you don't play the Pebble Beach itself, usually.
But I used to play it a lot when Chuck was the pro there.
you got the freebie?
We'd play it all the time. We'd play it. You know, he'd call me and he'd say, why don't you come over around, the last group goes out at 2 o'clock. Why don't you come out at 3:15 and we'll play till dark?
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
right?
This is Chuck Dunbar, the former pro at Pebble Beach.
So you got it on the arm, right?
We did get it on the arm. We did.
On the arm is always good.
On the arm is always good.
I can't imagine. What does it cost to pay that cost?
$600 plus you have to pay $575, I think. Plus you have to have a caddy, which costs you about $150, or a cart, which costs you
Wait
like
a second.
$80.
Is it $575 per person or for a foursome?
No, per person.
Are you kidding me?
And you have to stay. You have to stay either at Pebble Beach or Spanish Bay to qualify to play. And if you stay, you have to stay 2 nights at Spanish Bay to qualify for one tee time at Pebble Beach.
That's ridiculous.
It's a once in a lifetime trip, my friend.
It's America.
It's America. Were you on camera? Are you on camera, Derek?
No.
Derek Harris is
Derek
not on
Harris,
camera.
the third man in the booth.
The third man in the booth. Are you on camera?
Oh God.
I'm tired
So
of.
you'd be Mo, I'd be Larry, and he'd be Curly.
Well, who's the Fredo in that group?
I think we got 3 Fredos.
I think we got three Fredos in that group. Hey, our guest today is Grant Gordon, well-known mixed martial arts expert. He's going to talk to 2 dinosaurs about why mixed martial arts makes a difference in our society and in our world and in the world moving forward. So I'm looking forward to having Grant on.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I get it. I mean, it's really a lot of action in that sport, but I mean, it just knocked boxing out of the loop completely, right? I mean, it's like
Absolutely,
it's huge. I mean, incredible.
It's bigger than boxing. It may be the biggest sport in America today.
I think I read something about a contract, a huge television contract that they got that blows every other sport out of the water.
Grant will know about that. Grant will know about all of that stuff.
Yeah, pretty cool. Yeah, so that'd be interesting because we'll learn. I don't know nothing about it, really.
Yeah. So we would be remiss if we didn't discuss Afghanistan.
Jesus Christ almighty.
You going to go on a rant?
You know,
Get a sip of coffee before you go on a rant.
that's good coffee, by the way.
It is good
That
coffee.
doesn't come from Afghanistan.
No, it comes
What
from...
does come from Afghanistan? And why the hell were we over there to begin with? Opium. Opium comes from Afghanistan. I remember when we went in there to begin with, everybody assumed we were going to burn the opium fields. Instead, we surrounded them with troops to protect them, which is kind of remarkable. I mean, what was that all about? Now I'm hearing lithium. I mean, look, as a 9/11 guy, after 9/11, I was pissed. I was looking to get somebody. You know, I was all with Bush. Let's get him. Blow the freaking people back to the Stone Age. But why Iraq? Why Afghanistan? I mean, it was the Saudis that were on the goddamn plane. Of the attackers in the 9/11, 11 of them were Saudis.
Huh. Billy,
we never went to Saudi Arabia.
Billy, you're coming over to the dark side.
Well, I'm not a conspiracist, but look, everybody's blaming Biden, and I get it. We look like assholes throughout the world. It's a disgrace. You know, bailing out of Afghanistan, I'm always all for that. You'd like to think we could do it in a more orderly fashion, but let's go a little deeper.
Well, I will give Biden and Trump the pass because they were trying to get us out. Obama for 8 years did nothing about our getting us out, and Bush got us in.
Bush and
Cheney got us in for all the wrong reasons.
Well, maybe not for Cheney. Cheney made a lot of money.
Well, yeah.
He was with Halliburton,
of course,
right? I mean,
of course.
This thing with the $2 trillion in 20 years. First of all, Afghanistan hasn't been conquered since Alexander. Since Alexander.
By the way, when's the last time we won a war?
World War II?
World War II?
Yeah, World War II.
Yeah, well, we did win the Falkland Islands, but that was only a skirmish
No,
or a
not the
scrimmage.
Falkland, the Grenada.
Grenada.
Yeah, and that was terrific because when we went ashore at Grenada, there was more photographers than there were adversaries. So that was kind of interesting. That was Reagan showing strength in Grenada. We beat the shit out of Grenada, by the way. We took them.
You almost got a spit take out of me. You almost got a spit take out of me.
We could handle them. But, it's perpetual war. And you know what, Frank, you know me, I like history. You go back to World War I. The United States, before World War I, owed $16 million to Europe, which doesn't sound like a lot of money when we're talking about trillions and billions now. But $16 million before World War I, that's what we owed Europe. After World War I, they owed our banks $3 billion. So somebody said, you know what? There's a lot of money in this war business, isn't there? This thing is pretty good.
Yeah.
And then I look at this Citizens United. I'm going to blame Biden for the exit. What it's described, I'm going to blame Trump for signing the treaty that let 5,000 guys out of prison. And McMaster's, by the way, his former.
By the way, I think one of the Taliban that he let out of prison is now running the country. The Trump let out of prison is now running the country.
There's plenty of blame here to go around.
Absolutely.
H.F. McMaster's, his former security advisor, said that we capitulated right then when he signed the thing and didn't let the Afghans in on the peace thing, by the way. Mm-hmm. But, Biden, a disgrace before that. Because you know what I blame Biden for more than bailing out of Afghanistan and how terribly it was executed? He was right there for 40 years while all this shit was going on. Both sides of the aisle, man. It's money. It's what, 80, 90%, Derek?
Yeah.
Of this money, the $2 trillion spent.
Went to the military-industrial complex.
Went right into the defense contractors. There's a lot of big houses in Virginia, Frank. A lot of these guys are living pretty good.
Yeah.
$2 trillion, to put it in perspective, is $1. If I gave you $1 a second, to give you $2 trillion would take me 73,000 years. I want to know where every freaking cent of that money went.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every freaking cent.
You can probably look at 100 pockets.
You know what? You know what? That's very profound. I bet you could find most of it in 100 pockets. So I'm done with it. Listen, we have to have a strong defense. There's no doubt about it. When's the last time China was in a war?
Yeah.
They can spend a lot of money. I was in China, Frank. You can get on a train in Beijing and go to their airport at 130 miles an hour in a state-of-the-art train. State-of-the-art. Our transportation, we got bridges falling down here. Why? Because we keep spending money on war. And the biggest problem with this, with me anyway, and I'm ranting, I'm sorry, folks, I'm ranting, is Citizens United. We're not allowed to know when dark money comes into this country, and then corporations are supposed to be people. I'll believe corporations are people when I see one of the corporations come back in a body bag from Iraq.
Yeah, or pay or pay 1 cent of taxes.
Yeah, that's another thing. You go back to Eisenhower. During Eisenhower's administration, he said, beware of the military-industrial complex, right? Corporations paid $3 for every dollar the American citizen paid in taxes. Now they pay 30 cents.
For every dollar.
Yeah, for every dollar. So, it's all money. But I got a great anecdote that I read years ago. And I think it was Kipling. Let's say
it was Kipling for the sake of moving it along.
It was 30, 40 years ago I read it, but it was a remarkable anecdote. He was talking about the Brits building the Khyber Pass through Afghanistan. And while it was going on, there was a sniper up in the mountains. And he was killing a Brit every day. Every day, a Brit would get shot. And this had gone on for about 2 months. Finally, the major in charge of the building offered a 500-pound reward. Now we're talking about the 1800s. He offered a 500-pound reward for the head of that sniper. Mm-hmm. The very next day, a 7-year-old boy came up to him, the major, told him where the sniper was and how to get a hold of him. And they killed the sniper. So the major gave the child the 500 pounds and said, "How did you know?" Because that was my father. That's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a total different culture.
Yep.
A culture that we don't understand. And yet we go into all these freaking countries like we're going to change everything. So these guys that were fighting for us, they were collaborators.
Yeah.
It was the same thing in Vietnam.
Yeah.
The people that fought for the Viet Minh, the people that you would want on your side, if somebody invaded this country, I don't care if Bush was president, I don't care if Trump was president, I don't care if Obama was president. Somebody invades this country, I'm fighting to drive them the hell out.
Right.
I don't give a shit what their intentions are.
Exactly.
So when you go into Vietnam and you got people like DM, who we put in charge, you're getting the worst of those people. The good people are the people trying to push us out. And that's exactly what's happening in Afghanistan.
I don't disagree one bit.
Well, that's my rant. I mean, I think it's ridiculous for us to try to impose culture. And bad enough you go, when the British tried to keep this country under their palms, they were going 3,000 miles away. What is Afghanistan, 12,000 miles away?
Yeah, but I think that's the game, though, Billy. That's the game to get you to buy in as an American, that they want to change the culture. They're not interested in changing the culture at all.
No, they're protecting money.
Yeah.
Money.
Yeah.
It's all money.
Following the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
That's why we need term limits.
Yes.
I am so opposed to these guys, Mitch McConnell, or pick out any Democrat you want being in, or Joe Biden being in power for 40 years.
40 years he's shaking hands.
Or Dianne Feinstein being in power for 40 years. 6 years and out. The Constitution was set up to have a citizen's government. These guys are now politicians for real. They're not citizens at all. You get 6 years, term limits. You're not raising any money because you can't raise any money because you can't get thrown out of government. And bye-bye after 6 years and go back to your life as a citizen. I think the last really president we had was Harry Truman. He was just a real common man who just
owned a hardware store.
Owned a hardware store.
Harry owned a hardware store.
Yep. Yep.
And they put him to be vice president because they figured he couldn't do any damage there.
And ever since Harry, you look at a litany of presidential, I want to say, dishonor.
Well, I liked Eisenhower. I thought Eisenhower was a good president. Yeah, and you know what the knock on Eisenhower was?
He was stripping his secretary.
Well, yeah, there was that, of course. But that's a small fault of a good man, Frank. But the knock on Eisenhower, and I remember this as a kid. You know, I can remember being 7, 8 years old, going to first grade and having an I Like Ike button, you know.
Right.
And he ran against Stevenson. And Stevenson was the last presidential candidate to write his own speeches.
Right.
Stevenson. But Ike got so pissed off. There was a guy called Rosser Reeves. Now, bear with me for a second. David Halberstam wrote a great book about how all this was presented. Rosser Reeves was the advertising giant that used to do, do you like this or Brand X? You know, what is better, Brand X or this peanut butter? You know, he was an advertising genius. And Republicans, in desperation, because after 14 years of FDR, and then 8 more years of Truman, they hadn't been in power in 22 years. So they ran Eisenhower. Now, they didn't even know if Eisenhower, what political affiliation he was, because Eisenhower never voted.
Right.
And he did that because he felt it was dishonorable as a military man
right.
to have a preference.
Right.
So they didn't even know if he was a Republican. But Rosser Reeves, they sent him into Eisenhower's office. And they told him, we're going to shoot this commercial. But don't lean down so much because your baldness shows. Eisenhower went ballistics. He says, get him out of the office. He says, you don't want a president. You want an actor. Hire a bloody actor. He says, that's what you really want, you know. And that was the start of the whole mess, you know. But he warned about the military-industrial complex.
Yep.
It's bullshit. $2 trillion in 20 years? I blame Biden. I mean, I get 9/11. I was all fine. If they would have went to Saudi Arabia, Hey, let's get them. But no, that's money.
That's
The Saudis, we do business with the Saudis. That's money.
the biggest family that does business with the Saudis?
Bin Laden and
The Bushes.
Bushes and the Bin Laden. Yeah, well, didn't they fly out all the Bin Laden's people
They did.
right after 9/11?
That's right.
Look, I'm not a conspiracist. I'm really not. But money's money, and follow the money, and it's bullshit.
Yeah.
And there's guys dying, and I'm a veteran,
Well,
and it's bullshit.
well, I'm sure we'll get into that next week when we talk to Richie Picciati as well. But this week, before we bring on Grant Gordon, we want to do a call out to our sponsor, weekendcoffee.com. They brew premium blends and deliver them right to your door. And what do they do for the veterans?
Yeah, that's the big thing about this coffee. I mean, it's great coffee. It's good coffee. I like drinking it. But the big thing is every 10 bags, they donate a bag to first responders or to the military, veterans, and I'd like to consider myself a patriot. I have a lot of. I mean, I love this country probably only the way an immigrant can. I mean, I think I owe this country everything. So I appreciate that they do that for us.
That's great. That's a great sentiment to add. With that, let's bring on Grant. There he is. How you doing, my friend?
I am spectacular. How are you guys?
Good.
How are you, Grant?
That's Billy O'Connor, my good friend, and there is
Hi, Billy.
Derek Harris, the third man in the booth.
Hello, hello.
Hey, Derek.
How are you, Grant? Heard a lot of good things about you, pal. Looking forward to the interview.
Well, hopefully some of them are true.
I'm going to tell you one thing you didn't hear, Billy. I told you that two guys passed on writing the book before you said yes. He was the
one of them?
second. He was the second guy.
So he's a lot smarter than I am. He's a lot smarter than I am, apparently.
He could be sitting there right now. He's speechless.
No comment.
So how are you, my friend? How you been?
Doing well. In the midst of NFL preseason football, which I did not miss, and I don't think anybody did, but it's here and it's all over the place. So that's what I've been dealing with a lot lately.
How'd you get interested in mixed martial arts?
Well, boxing, basically, in a roundabout way. My father was a big boxing fan, and he was, grew up as, riding a Harley, and him and his buddies would get into trouble, and they were tough guys, so to speak. So I grew up in somewhat of that culture. And when the UFC came out in 1993, it got a lot of buzz, which back in the day, buzz was not the internet, but just word of mouth. And it did surprisingly well on the old pay-per-view model. And then he ordered UFC 2. And we watched it. My dad ordered UFC 2 on pay-per-view. And it was like, wow, what is this stuff? And if you were to watch it today, it would look nothing like today's current product. It was guys from different disciplines. You had karate and boxing, and it was a showcase for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which was basically the Gracie family. They led the way, and Royce Gracie, who was like 170 pounds, was beating guys way bigger than him with this stuff called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that people really didn't know about. And it had somewhat of a underground popularity, a lot with celebrities, and now it's huge with celebrities. Everybody's rolling and practicing jiu-jitsu, but that was initially how I got into it. And then eventually it went into what they call the dark ages, where you couldn't really see it anywhere. It was outlawed. And then it got big again around, I want to say 2004, 2005. And that's when I started writing about it, working for you, Frank. And that's when it really started blowing up. And so that's how I got into it.
And then you got to cover it for the LA Times, for the Glendale News Press. And you've been a big supporter of mixed martial arts. When did Dana White get involved?
Dana White, off the top of my head, was around 2003, 2004. He's been the president. The Fertitta brothers, who were friends of his, childhood friends, they purchased it. And they essentially rescued the sport, and it wasn't a quick fix, but they, the UFC, it's not hard to explain, but UFC is Kleenex or Coke. They are the biggest league or organization for mixed martial arts. But they bought the UFC when mixed martial arts was barely able to run in states, certainly not any prominent states with big crowds or anything such as that. So when Dana White took over with the Fertitta brothers buying it, they really invested in it and looked to turn it around. And slowly but surely, it was getting better. But for me, the big thing was they used their own money to fund the Ultimate Fighter reality show. And that got on, gosh, it's had so many incarnations. Now it's Paramount. I believe then it was Spike. I don't think it was TNN. I forget. But they got a reality show on, and it kind of introduced these fighters into people's living room as real people, kind of wacky, kind of crazy.
Grant, so how much do you think Dana White's personality led to the success of the UFC?
I think it was a huge factor. Right now, I think it's always difficult to see things how they were when somebody is still prominent. But right now, Dana White gets vilified a lot. Some of his political leanings, his beliefs about, the pandemic, and I don't think he's ever worn a mask. But when he first became prominent, in my eyes, a lot of the success of the UFC was because they did what boxing was not doing. They didn't have a bunch of weight classes. They didn't prop people up by feeding them, to ham and eggers. And they had the top guys facing the top guys. And Dana was honest almost to a fault. He was very blunt. And it was kind of refreshing. And he was also steadfast in his belief that they were going to build and they were going to be huge because of really two factors. Was that no matter where you are in the world, you've seen fighting. And he would always use the adage of, if there's a fight on the corner, everybody's going to turn and look. And he had this dogged mentality. And I certainly don't agree with a lot of the things he said or all of the things he said, but he was the driving force. And maybe he gets a little too much credit sometimes. I think that's what a lot of the MMA media would argue. But if it weren't for him, I certainly don't think it would be the sport, or the UFC in particular, would be where it is today.
Well,
he was a driving force.
He built Chuck Liddell. He
to a
built
certain-
Conor McGregor. He built Ronda Rousey. I mean, they had to deliver in the ring, but wasn't his promotional skills a big factor in their prominence, or in their rise to prominence?
Well, I think, like you said, they have to do what they do in the cage, but yes, you can push somebody. And obviously Conor and Ronda and Chuck were pushed, but they had to deliver. But there's also too that it factor, because they've tried to push other stars and they didn't catch with the audience. And maybe there's people that people think could have been stars that they didn't push enough. The star making thing, sometimes it's the promoter plus this and that, but I think with a promoter, a successful one, it's seen when the sport is successful, whether they have stars or not. Because when you have big stars, that can carry a promotion. And when, Conor and Ronda overlapped for a brief time, they were doing great. Now, Conor, according to Forbes, was the richest athlete in 2020, but he hasn't won a fight in a long time. As quick-witted as he used to be, a lot of his stuff is seen by most as boorish right now, but the UFC is still maintained. And I think with Dana building stars, I think he's partially involved, but I think more him was just what they did to get this sport out there. I mean, it was not allowed in a lot of states, and that was a huge lift for them to go over and over. And I remember, when I worked for you at Hall of Fame, I would talk to him a lot for the stories I was writing, because back then, I could still get a phone interview with the guy, and he would thank me every time for my support of the sport. And you could tell that was the goal, was growing the sport, getting it legalized, and getting it into people's minds. And now it's a different step where it's on ESPN or ESPN Plus almost every week. Every weekend. And you've got other promotions like Bellator on Showtime, and World Series of Fighting is also on ESPN and ESPN Plus, and it's everywhere. And that was, I think, the thing he did the best and most, was grow the promotion and grow the sport.
So what's the difference between Bellator and mixed martial arts and the unique UFC? What's the difference between them?
It's really tough. I don't like comparing other sports, and I like that I just said that, and I'm now going to do the same thing. But so if you have, the NFL and the Canadian Football League, so to speak, there's obviously this huge disparity, so it's hard for our minds to get around it, but they're just different leagues presenting the same sport. It's hard to compare to boxing, because boxing has so many levels, and I feel that's one of the reasons boxing has stunted its growth and popularity, because with boxing, you have the networks and the pay-per-view providers that they have contracts with, and then you have the alphabet soup of all the organizations, like you have the WBO champion, the WBA, the WBC. So boxing doesn't necessarily have leagues. It has more promotions, which is somewhat what MMA is as well. They have promoters that are just named leagues, like the UFC or Bellator, just as boxing has Top Rank, or something such as that. So they're just different leagues or promoters that sign the fighters to contracts, and then they hold events and promote them, and that's what they fight under. But the UFC has really been the undisputed number one promotion since, I want to say, 2004, 2005, when Pride was really huge in Japan, but Pride has not existed for a long time.
I got to ask you a question. Frank is obviously more initiated, knows more about mixed martial arts than I do. But we were talking about Dana White. For the uninitiated out there, for our audience, Dana White was the driving force behind this becoming popular. Is that who he is? I mean, give me a just.
He was a part owner, far less than the Fertitta brothers, Lorenzo and Frank, and he was the president and promoter. Now the ownership has changed. WME, I believe I'm getting that correct, has owned it.
William Morris?
Yeah. And it is now taking, not William Morris, help me out, Frank, Ari, his company.
Ari Emanuel?
Yes.
Ari Emanuel's company.
Yeah. And so since they bought it with a massive deal, then after that, the UFC signed with ESPN and ESPN Plus. So all their events are exclusive to ESPN and ESPN Plus, but Dana White is still there as the president, as the promoter. And essentially, since around 2005, even as stars have come and gone, he has been the face of the UFC. And some would then argue mixed martial arts. But stars come and go, but he's always been the figurehead. I mean, some people would compare him to, Don King or Bob Arum,
right?
Something like that. Don King he likes. Last I heard, I don't think him and Bob Arum really like each other. He actually has some funny Don King stories, I've heard. So
I imagine Don King got some funny Dana White stories as well.
Yeah.
So he's of that era. I mean, your dad was a big boxing fan. So I'm guessing you're like 50 years old, 47, around there?
Sure.
Is that about right? I mean, because I'm 73.
A little younger than that,
In
but
my
yeah.
day, boxing was the sport other than baseball. Boxing was the second biggest sport. So I look at this mixed martial arts, and obviously it's massive. It's huge. What would be the prelude for a good mixed martial arts fighter? Would it be a kickboxer? Would it be a jiu-jitsu guy? Would it be a wrestler? Would it be a boxer? What would be the best prep to be good at it, in your opinion?
Well, the thing is, that used to be the question everybody asked, but now, because it was such a young sport, it has changed to where, so you would have guys that would argue, well, you want to start being a wrestler, or you want to start being a jiu-jitsu guy, or you want to start being a striker, which would be a kickboxer or a boxer. And in the earlier days, there was waves of what was the most prominent. At the very beginning, it was jiu-jitsu, but then wrestling took over, and you had these hulked out wrestling guys that could defend jiu-jitsu by being on top and taking a guy down and pounding him out. And then, it became strikers, because if they could defend a takedown and stay on their feet, they could knock a jiu-jitsu or a wrestler guy out. But now, as the sport has evolved, you have the new generation, you have these kids, they're not training just one thing. They're going to gyms where they can train MMA, and they can train everything together. And it has become a sport. I mean, there's still obviously people that train one discipline, and then they drive over to the next town and go to another gym and they train another. And that probably won't ever stop. But right now, I mean, I believe they first called it cross training, but it's really mixed martial arts training, where you're trying to be the complete fighter. And as they would say, a guy who's comfortable anywhere the fight goes. If it's in the clinch up against the cage or a Muay Thai clinch, they're comfortable. If it's on the ground, they're comfortable if they're on top, or if they're on the bottom and, could pull a submission off their back, or they're comfortable standing up, kicking, or punching, anything like that. So that's where it is now. I don't think there's one discipline you can say is the best to train or the best to start with, because now everybody incorporates everything.
What do you think is the most, if you had one night to repeat in your covering mixed martial arts over your course of your career, what's the one fight that you would want to revisit today? And that you were there in person too. The fight that you were there in person that you would want to revisit because it was so exciting for you.
It was the first time Ronda Rousey fought in the UFC. And I feel history has lost sight of how big an event it was, because it was the first time a women's fight took place in the UFC. But there was a lot of controversy, like, oh, how can they put this on as the main event? And at that point in my career, I was the editor for the Glendale News Press, among other Los Angeles Times community newspapers. And I always went out of my way to cover boxing and mixed martial arts, because it was something not a lot of mediums covered, especially the newspaper business. And it got us a lot of attention and a lot of clicks, a lot of readership. And Ronda was this huge rising star, and she was the biggest reason why Dana White relented and allowed women's fighting. But despite her popularity, there was a lot of people that were like, why is she headlining a pay-per-view for this vacant title? Which it wasn't vacant. They had given it to her because she held it from a previous organization. But it was this huge event, not just for, I think, in sports in general, because there is, other than maybe, I guess you guys could argue with me, women's tennis, women have never been put at the top of most sports where they're equal or even above men. And this was saying that, like, this is the first fight. It's going to be the main event. And she dominated all of her fights up until then. And she had a brief scare in that fight, but she still won in the first round. And it was this huge event. She had done a ridiculous amount of media leading up to it. And it just had this air of history, and the place was packed, and it just, it felt like something special was going to happen the whole time, and it did, and it was great. And also, you hear celebrities talk about it, you hear athletes from other sports, that big fight feel, and that's all only happens in fighting. And that was very much there, but then some, because there was that element of history and just the novelty of it. It was something happening that had never been done before. And it's, I could always say, hey, I was a part of history. I saw the first ever UFC women's fight, and I saw Ronda Rousey submit Liz Carmouche in the first round. And it was pretty spectacular to be there, and I was happy to have been there.
Who's your favorite interview person that you ever interviewed in mixed martial arts?
You sent me on an assignment once to interview Chuck Liddell, and it wasn't the greatest interview, but sitting at a bar interviewing a guy, having drinks and just BSing was great. In terms of interview, though, Ronda was easily the best.
Wow.
She is one of the most confident people I've ever met, and she was never at a loss for words. And sometimes it was just amazing to see her as she got more popular. She got more and more detractors, even though she got more popular. But the way she could, we'd be crammed in this corner gym in Glendale, the Glendale Fighting Club, and we're all sweating, and there's people crammed in there, and she's just running the room. And it was something pretty exceptional to see. One of the last times I remember, she had a shirt with Elvis and Muhammad Ali on it. And it was just like, I'm not going to say she was at that level, but, she knew how to be a star at that point. It didn't end gracefully, and that's why I think she's not recognized in history as she should be. But it was pretty amazing seeing her rise and reach just such a high status. I talked to her before her first ever fight, which was in Tarzana at like a country club. And just when you see somebody ascend like that, as you well know, Frank, my history is covering prep sports. And one of the greatest things about covering prep sports was you see these kids grow and develop and potentially play in college. And, oh my God, they made it to the pros, and you knew them when. So to see these fighters go from the regional scene to being, one of the biggest names in sports. Beyonce was using her quotes at her concerts and stuff like that. That was really a fun ride to be on. It was a good run.
So this is airing September 1st. What upcoming fights are there on the horizon, and do you have predictions for those fights?
I don't want to not be part of the fun, but the thing is right now, the UFC is in a little bit of a weird thing, like other sports with the vaccine, and that's throwing some things. One fight that's not signed that's big is they have a guy that just won recently, Cyril Gain, whose name I'm saying incorrectly. He won the interim heavyweight championship. He's from France. So he's now supposed to face the heavyweight champion, Francis Ngannou. And that should be great, but it's not signed. There's money stuff. The off-controversial Jon Jones, who's the greatest UFC fighter of all time, he doesn't have any fights coming up. Conor McGregor's recovering from an injury. He's not going to be back for a while. But the biggest card on the horizon, it's going to be Madison Square Garden, which every time they go there, they have a massive event. That's why there is a little bit of some problems, because as I understand it, MSG needs everybody to be vaccinated. So if a fighter isn't vaccinated, they're not going to be able to fight. But the main event, what's that?
Fans too.
Yes, exactly. The main event is Kamaru Usman, who's the UFC welterweight champion, and he is right now, in terms of active guys, which excludes Jon Jones or Khabib Nurmagomedov, he is the most dominant guy in mixed martial arts right now. And he's defending his title against a bitter rival named Colby Covington. They fought before. Usman won, but Covington did pretty well. But Covington is, I mean, for lack of a better description, he's a troll. He will
You know what?
he will say whatever he wants to say to rile people up.
Let me stop you for a second, Grant. Sorry.
Okay.
Can you define what troll is for the new
Billy
generation?
O'Connor.
A troll is somebody that will essentially say, or in internet jargon, I guess, type anything to just get a rise out of people. And they enjoy pissing people off and making them mad. And you know what? You can credit it to many fighters of the past, or maybe even Howard Stern, who they said more people listened to him that hated him than people that loved him. But you can draw a lot of money being a bad guy and saying stuff that pisses people off. And Covington has been a staunch Trump supporter to the point that Trump has seen him fight in person. They've talked on the phone. He'll wear his MAGA hat, and Covington will say anything. And you know, he's emulated guys in the past, like such as Chael Sonnen, who I thought were a lot more clever and interesting, and you can tell they knew what they were doing. They were part of the story. Covington, you're not sure what's real or what's for show, and he just doesn't stop. So that's going to draw a lot of people. And there's another fight coming up for guys like me that's going to be really special, because it's a rematch that happened, I want to say 15, 16 years ago, between Robbie Lawler, who is on the downside of his career, but he still can knock out anybody, and Nick Diaz. And Nick Diaz and his brother Nate are two of the most popular and polarizing figures in mixed martial arts, and that they really don't give an F about what they do or what they say. And that's why people love them, is they're 100% completely true to themselves, and they make no apologies. So that should be a good one. But the big one I have my eyes on is November 6th in Madison Square Garden, Usman versus Covington 2. I think that's going to draw quite a lot of pay-per-view buys.
And it'll be pay-per-view on ESPN Plus? Or
Yeah.
ESPN?
No, ESPN Plus. So you subscribe to ESPN Plus, and they have events almost weekly, but you got to subscribe to ESPN Plus to get the pay-per-view.
You know, in my day, the troll was a shit stirrer. That's pretty much what we're talking about. He was a shit stirrer.
The same thing.
But
Same thing.
the thing that really impressed me when you were talking about the fight that's coming up as a welterweight, in this mixed martial arts, in boxing, you know, the heavyweights were always the big draw. The middleweights, yeah, if they were good, yes. The welterweights, lightweights, not so much. Does it matter the weights for the draw in mixed martial arts?
No, I think that's a great point that you bring up that's changed is, I mean, I mentioned women's fights being able to headline, but also any weight can. In boxing, for so long, heavyweights were the draw.
Right.
And then in the 80s, you had, you know, the big four with Hagler, Leonard, Duran, and Hearns. I always make sure to say Hagler first because he is my father's favorite fighter. And then, you know, you have Mayweather. What's that?
Is your father Joe Rogan?
No. No, he is not.
That's his favorite.
I did not know that. Okay, that's good to know.
Marvelous Marv, huh?
Yeah.
Knock you out with either hand.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off there.
It's all good.
But the weights don't make that much of a difference in your sport.
No, because, I mean, Conor McGregor started out at 145 pounds. You know, then he's fought at 155, 170. When Ronda was a huge star, she was fighting at 135 pounds. The biggest stars, it doesn't matter the weight class. It's the it factor. It's the dominance. It's what they say on the mic. The Usman-Covington fight is a welterweight title fight, which in mixed martial arts is 170 pounds. So it really doesn't matter the weight. I mean, to a certain extent, yes, it can. The lowest weight class for the UFC is flyweight 125, and the men's division has never really been a huge draw. But that I don't think is necessarily because, hey, these guys are tiny. It's because a lot of you don't see as many knockouts and finishes. But it doesn't matter the weight. It doesn't matter the sex. It doesn't matter where you're from. I mean, there are UFC champions, I believe, from I want to say 8 countries right now. You've got people from France and Africa and the United States, of course, and Brazil has always been a powerhouse. But it really is a global sport. And that is something that I'm never going to think that it can surpass soccer or anything like that. But it is a sport that can appeal to all different countries and ways of life. I mean, that was something that boxing really had. You know, you can watch a documentary and see, you know, Roberto Duran won a title and had a parade waiting for him when he got off the plane, and the entire country shut down and stuff like that. And so you take from these countries and you have these major athletes that are coming up through whatever they're coming up through, and they become champions. And that's going to resonate just not in the United States, but across the globe.
You know, funny you mentioned Roberto Duran. Roberto Duran is a native of Panama. And
That's what you're.
And the 2 great heroes of Panama were Roberto Duran and Rod Carew. And I was with Rod when we ran into Roberto Duran in Vegas. And there were 2 Panamanian heroes sitting there talking. They had never met each other before. And it was a remarkable sight to see.
Wow, that must have been some kick. Wow.
Hey, let me ask you, Grant, Conor McGregor, do you feel his effectiveness as a fighter declined at all with the amount of tattoos he got?
Of course. It's ink poisoning. No, I mean, if you were going to argue tattoos stop a fighter from fighting, half of mixed martial arts wouldn't exist anymore. Tattoos are pretty prominent. If you see a guy fighting, or even a woman for that matter, that doesn't have a tattoo, it's a rarity lately. So tattoos are pretty prominent.
You blew my mind before when you said Ronda Rousey was only like 130 pounds. Like,
she fought at 135. Yeah.
And you said she was the most confident person you ever met. So do you think her aura, the way she self-promoted herself had just as much to do with her becoming such an enormous success as her talent, just the way McGregor is like a loudmouth? Like, I would call him Shanty Irish. I was born in County Cork. And I look at McGregor and I say, this guy's Shanty Irish, you know?
What do you mean by that?
Shanty Irish meaning like a trailer park Irish guy. Okay. You know what I mean? Like a knacker. We would call him a knacker in Ireland. The knacker is a gypsy. And it's a derogatory term, you know? Whether that's persona that he puts on because... Right. You know, it's money, you know.
Well, what did you tell me about Ireland?
That would be more Tyson Fury, I think, from boxing. He was, if I remember correctly, I don't think gypsy is a PC term anymore, but he was like a traveler, Tyson Fury, the boxing heavyweight champion. But McGregor was they knew he was going to be a star when they signed him. And he was quick-witted. Lately, he's gone over the line in a lot of people's eyes. I don't know if you've ever had a disagreement with a friend and you can bust balls, and then you have those other friends that aren't good at it, so they just get personal with you because that's their default. They don't have a good comeback, so they'll just say something personal about your family. That's what McGregor's become. But to your question about Ronda, I believe she became so big because of many things, but I always thought her confidence was right near the top. She would always say that her mother, who was a phenomenal judo practitioner, judoka as well, taught her so much. And one of the things that she ingrained in her was when you go out there to fight, nobody has the right to beat you. And a lot of people looked at that as a negative, but I didn't see it that way. I saw it as a way that she became this confident, beautiful savage who dominated people. And so when she lost, she did not handle it well. And a lot of people rejoiced in that. But when you think and you expect to be the best, and you will settle for nothing less, and that's actually what you believe, I can't imagine how you're going to deal with that loss. And it's obviously not going to be good. Unfortunately for me, I've never had that confidence, so I can't relate. But when you think you're better than anybody, and you go out and you prove it time and again, and you finally feel that loss, it's not going to go well for you. And I think that's what happened. But your point about the confidence, I think, is spot on. And that's what a lot of these fighters have. And you can see it through their careers too. Like when they lose that first time, how do they rebound? Because some people's confidence takes a big hit. So too does their chins. Because it's not the same as boxing. It's a lot easier to get knocked out because the gloves are so much so much smaller. And I've seen a lot of fighters that part of their success is their chin. They can just wade in and take 10 shots for their one, and their one knocks the opponent out. But once they get dinged once, their career can go down. I think that's a lot what happened with Chuck Liddell, who was always a personal favorite of mine. And he could, a farm animal could hit him in the face and he'd keep walking forward. But after he got knocked out by Rampage Jackson, his chin just wasn't the same, and it was really sad to see.
Billy, why don't you tell me about, we talked about Conor McGregor. Why don't you tell me how popular Conor McGregor is in Ireland? With the 4 photographs?
Well, years ago, when I first went back to Ireland, I guess it was about 1971, you could walk into any house in Ireland and there'd always be 2 pictures. And I don't care whose house you go into, there was always a picture of the Pope and a picture of John F. Kennedy. That was it. Lately, in the last 20, 15 years, I'd go back and it was 3 pictures. There'd be a picture of the Pope, John F. Kennedy, and Bono. Now, there's 4 pictures. And McGregor is the 4th, As a matter of fact, I think we have a picture of my cousin, Billy Moynihan. This is a cousin from my mother's side. Actually, he's a distant relative of Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
Oh, where?
Billy, the Moynahans in my family. But Billy's a young kid, 17 years old. He's 22 now, but mixed martial arts. And when he was in Ireland, here's a picture of him and Conor himself. Here's a guy running around Ireland with a Maserati, and so I don't think too many people are calling him a knacker nowadays, or not to his face anyway. But so I mean, he is an icon in Ireland, without a doubt. And again, from what you're saying, and I didn't know this before, but it's as much about his persona, like Ali did. Ali did the same thing. He drew because, well, let's face it, 90% of white America wanted to see him get knocked on his ass. And that's what he did, and he capitalized on it. And back in them days, that's the way it was. Revisionist history might not be like that now, but people paid hoping to see somebody shut his big mouth.
We could go back to boxing like we were talking about the 80s. That was, my father loved Hagler because he did things the hard way. He worked his way up. He didn't get all the pomp and circumstance that Sugar Ray Leonard did, who was making more money for his debut than most guys were making, after winning titles. And that was what my dad loved about Marvin Hagler, was he would fight anybody at any time, and he did things the hard way, and nothing was handed to him. But in sports, particularly combat sports or individual sports, that's not what's going to make you a star. It's that it factor, and that's an element of controversy, being able to say whatever is on your mind and making no apologies. And that's what McGregor did. And, he provided sound bites. He provided highlights. That's one thing you asked what I think would be the best discipline to start with. The thing that makes a big star a lot is, in terms of in their performance, is the highlights. And Conor was able to knock a lot of people out. And I remember once, I won't name the name, but a prominent mainstream journalist said that Ronda Rousey wouldn't be big because she wasn't knocking people out. You want to be big, you got to be like Mike Tyson and knock people out. It's like she was armbarring people within the first minute. That's dominance. And no matter what anybody says, people want dominance. That's why the Yankees were the most popular team.
Fair point.
That's why they still are, even though they're not winning like they used to.
Celtics.
Because people are drawn to dominance.
That's a fair point.
I got a couple of fire questions. So,
Okay.
Are you on camera?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Oh, for sure.
okay.
I mean,
no,
say what you
well-
will about him, but the guy had a broken leg and he was sitting on his butt in his last fight, shouting off insults. And Rhonda, who doesn't really tweet anymore, she was one of his few defenders, and she said, you know, essentially props to him. He's already selling his next fight. So even though he lost and he was going to lose, Dustin Poirier beat him. Dustin Poirier, by the way, he's Marvin Hagler-esque. This guy gives to charity. He's a phenomenal fighter, has come back from a loss to McGregor to beat him. Then a third match, a second rematch. He was beating him again before McGregor broke his leg, essentially. That's not the exact term, but McGregor was already, you know, talking crap, and so there's always going to be appeal. And that's another thing about MMA that's different from boxing is guys' records aren't sparkling. Once you lose once, you don't necessarily lose your drawing power. Conor McGregor has lost 4 or 5 of his last 6, if you include his boxing match against Mayweather. So guys can come back from losses. He'll definitely be back.
So I guess I should have asked a better question, although that answer was amazing. Does he ever come back and win?
I guess that depends on who he fights.
If he fights Billy or me, he's got a chance. Derek, he may not have a chance, but Billy or me, he's got a chance.
He beats me before I get in the ring.
Everybody wants to fight him because
Money.
he's worth more than a title, you know. So, but he could have another rematch with Nate Diaz, which were 2 of the most exciting fights ever, and they split. He could have another shot with Poirier. Khabib Nurmagomedov completely dominated him, and then a riot broke out after he beat him. And Conor's always wanted a rematch, but Khabib has retired undefeated, and Khabib is just this completely honorable person and believes Conor is an evil person, and he will not give him the rematch because he doesn't deserve it. And so I don't think that'll ever happen, but there's so many fights they could make with Conor. So it depends on who he fights. It depends the weight. Frankly, it depends on where his mind's at. He's gotten himself in plenty of trouble outside of the cage, and so you just wonder, you know, I mean, he's got a lot of money. I don't think he would need to fight again, but I definitely think he will. And if it were me, I'd book him against some ham and egger so he could get a big win and not derail anybody else. But I don't think they'll do that. I think it's only big fights from here on out.
Well, they sort of did that with Cowboy, right?
Yeah, to a certain extent.
Not that he's a ham and egger, but he was in
He was definitely
Wait. Cowboy.
Donald Cowboy Cerrone.
Well, I'm glad you and Billy know. I'm glad you and Derek know who we're talking about.
I didn't even know who Dana White was. So I mean, I'm sitting here as the
Cowboy
outsider.
Donald Cowboy Cerrone is phenomenal. This is a guy that fought almost more than anybody. Half the time he would drive an RV to fights so he could take breaks. He would train on the road. He would stop, do all kinds of extreme sports. The guy was crazy, but he had, unfortunately, that rep of being the guy that when it came to the biggest fight, that's where he would fall short. And, I mean, him and Conor, because they used to have these massive press conferences where I'm sure they still will once, you know, we get through the demic and whatnot, but they would lay out, like, here's the next 6 major events, and they have all these stars, and Conor would just hold court and get half the people laughing and half the people pissed off, and he'd be promoting one fight, but he'd set up 2 or 3 others at the same time, and that's how him and Cowboy started having beef. And yeah, to your point, Derek, he did kind of take care of Cowboy after Cowboy was on his decline.
So the promotion is like professional wrestling. The difference is this is on the level. I mean, but it's like being a loudmouth, being promotional, like
it's like boxing.
But it's on the level.
Yeah. Well, boxing's on the level, sort of.
Well,
sort of. It's funny because professional wrestling should actually have a step on all of them because they can, predetermine the outcome. They should be able to
Wait a second. Wrestling is predetermined?
You mean wrestling on the level?
On the level?
Next thing you're going to tell me Liberace wasn't straight.
Next thing you're going to tell me there's no Santa Claus.
Spoiler alert.
Hey, I got 2 nephews. I'm not saying that on camera.
I got a question for you. Tell me something. Convince me now.
Yes.
I'm totally not aware. I mean, I've seen the sport, but I'm not a fan. But from looking at it, it looks to me like a street fight, short of hitting a guy over the head with an empty liquor bottle. I mean, I know there's an art to it, but it's pretty much a street fight. Anything goes, no?
No, I would wholeheartedly disagree, but I see how you're saying that. I think what's changed most with the advent of mixed martial arts is how we perceive fighting. 30, 40 years ago, guys were tough guys more on perception than anything. Like, hey, you don't want to F with that guy. He's a tough guy. Well, why is he a tough guy? Well, because for 30 seconds, he beat up a guy in a drunken bar fight. But he doesn't really know how to fight. These guys train in it. And so when it comes to it, they just don't come out swinging like this. And they're calm and cool. And as the sport has evolved, the person I was taught or learned from was interviewing Randy Couture, because this was a guy who had a lot of losses, a lot more wins, a lot more championships, but he was winning titles in his 40s. And a lot of it was because of his strategy going in the fights and how he prepared for his particular opponent. He was at an Olympic wrestling level for Greco-Roman, but he would outbox guys that were strikers. He shocked Chuck Liddell when he beat him in their first fight, doing just that by outboxing him. Right. And he was able to, he beat James Toney in a fight that's oft forgotten because it was the first major boxer that said, hey, I'll go and fight in the UFC. And Randy Couture just ankle picked him and submitted him just so easily. But these guys do think, and it's the training, and fighting has evolved. And I realize that because, I've had family members. I remember my grandfather did not like this stuff, and he wasn't a particular sports fan either. But when the guys would go to the ground and another guy was on top of another guy beating him down or submitting him, he thought it was dirty. Like, that's not fair. And it's just a different way of fighting. And it's a more cerebral and intelligent way of fighting. And that's really where it starts, was the Gracies introducing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It was a way for little guys to defend themselves against big guys. Let's take them down. We're all the same size on the ground, and I will submit you. I will choke you out. I will armbar you, et cetera, et cetera.
That's a great answer, Grant, when I was talking about the street fight, because I was always impressed with watching, by being a big boxing fan, the difference between a professional boxer and a guy on the street. If you hit me on the street and you hurt me, I'm going to come back like a lunatic to try and hurt you. Whereas a boxer, a professional boxer, stays calm. And they're dangerous.
I want to tell you a story, a really quick story, and I won't say his name. But Mike Tyson used to hang around the stage of head of the class. And there were 2 guys, Brian Robbins and Daniel Snyder. They were having a conversation, and they said, what do you think would happen if he fought against so-and-so? And we said, because this fella was a huge street fighter, and they were feeling that he could kick Mike's ass. And I asked this guy, well, they're having a debate whether how would you do against Tyson? And he said this, I don't know about how I do against Tyson, but he was a Vietnam veteran. And he said, I'll tell you one thing. You put him behind enemy lines, 45 minutes later, I'd be out and he'd be hanging by his heels from a tree. So
different skills for different folks.
Different skills for different folks. Yeah.
But yeah,
that's a great story. I wish there was a book I could read about Mike Tyson's time behind the scenes on Head of the Class. Could I pick up something such as that?
Yes, you might be able to.
If These Lips Could Talk by Billy O'Connor and not Grant Gordon.
You didn't get the royalty up front then, Grant. That you should have held out.
I did not. No.
I got a couple questions. Two more questions because I want to get some controversy going. Okay. So what are your thoughts on fighter pay? So one of the big controversies with Dana White is that fighters don't get paid what they should get paid, and the UFC essentially makes all the money.
Yes. Based on percentages of what they draw, and also it's a little bit, I hate math. That's why I started writing. Because I don't like to add, and then when you write, you don't make a lot of money, so you don't have to count. It's good that way. But no, I agree, and I mean, it's a weird thing in sports in particular where you like these people, and then you find out things you really don't like about them, and the pay structure with the UFC is not good. I mean, I've covered a lot of boxing, and you find out, that this guy who was in the co-main event on a card that was in ESPN2 was going to make, $60,000. And then you find out that a UFC fighter who won his fight and was on TV makes like half that much. Yeah. That was a few years ago, but the pay structure is really bad. It should be far more because, I mean, a lot of these people, something goes wrong in their life. A family member is injured or sick, or they have something go wrong. You see them pop up with a GoFundMe. You see a lot of the women's fighters on OnlyFans accounts. You see a lot of these fighters, they're not full-time fighters. They have to have another job. A lot of them will teach at the gym that they work out at because they have to make ends meet. And when you become a Ronda Rousey or a Chuck Liddell or a Conor McGregor, of course you're making money. But I just named 3 people, and there's not many more like them. So it should be, the fighter pay should be more. And quite frankly, there's not a lot of initiative for it to be because of the new infrastructure with ESPN's deal. You got a guy like Jon Jones who wants to be paid X amount millions to fight next, and they don't want to do it. Well, they don't really need to because they have this contract with ESPN Plus, so they, as I understand it, it's just like TV fees now. ESPN Plus has paid them for those pay-per-views, and yeah, they're going to get money from the gate, but if they make X amount of pay-per-views, they're essentially going to make the same amount of money if they made Y. So why pay more money for a bigger star? Because you're still going to bring in the same amount of money because of this contract you have with ESPN Plus. But to answer your question directly, I don't agree with it. The fighter pay should be a lot better. The sport has evolved, and so too should the fighters pay. At the beginning, I thought it was. Thank you.
And then my last question, I think these guys may have some other. If you were to rank these 3 people in order of importance for the UFC in terms of creating popularity, Dana White, Joe Rogan, and Conor McGregor.
I would go Dana White, Conor, and Joe number 3. Joe's been around the longest, and he's done great things for the sport. But I mean, as mammoth as he is with his podcast, I don't know how much of that translates to UFC popularity. Joe Rogan is amazing though, because there's few people that are known for so many different things. Like I think most people know him for his podcast now, but plenty of people know him for the UFC. Plenty of people know him for being a comedian. Plenty of people know him for Fear Factor. I mean, I thought he was great on news radio. Very underrated show.
Well, let me tell you, Joe Rogan, we're coming after you.
Yeah, he's scared.
Hey, before,
Oh, he's scared, Frank.
before we go, I would be remiss if we didn't ask Grant about the NFL because he covers the NFL for NFL.com. What's your take on the upcoming season? How do you think Trevor Lawrence will do? How do you think the quarterback will do? The Giants, will they have a resurgence?
Quarterbacks. That's all anybody cares about. This season, it's weird. I don't think people are really realizing yet is going to be the longest season of all time. It's a 17-game season. So can't wait for that, he said with sarcasm. I think Trevor Lawrence, I don't believe in a can't miss, but he's pretty darn close. And
good coach there too.
Urban Meyer.
Well, I don't think he's a good coach.
I think he's a great coach.
Yeah, in college, what's he won in the pros? 0-0. You can't. Don't tell me about Urban Meyer. You got to.
Well, I will tell you about Urban Meyer. I shared a message with my colleagues yesterday that I don't think I've ever heard a coach in press conferences talk more about rules. And he talks about the rules of practicing and this and that. And on the heels of him bringing in Tebow, which a lot of people thought was, kind of a publicity stunt, I'm not sure. I think it was that as much as, just a favor to a guy that he coached and thinks highly of. But I feel that a lot of insiders think that Urban believes that he can recruit talent, so to speak, like he did in college, and having the most talent will make you a winner. That's not how it works in the NFL.
And in the NFL, you got to work with a 53-man roster, not a 105-man roster, and that's a big, big thing that he's got to prove. I don't think it's not a slam dunk that Urban's going to be a good coach. And plus, you talk about a fighter getting up from a knockdown. Urban's going to lose more than he's going to win this year, and he's never lost more than he's going to win. I don't know how he's going to react to that because he always got out of University of Florida. Because he had a heart attack or something like that. He got out of...
He had serious health issues, yeah.
Yeah, well, he said he has serious health issues. He's always... yeah.
I think he did.
Yeah, I think he did also, but he's always escaped before the sheriff caught up to him. And I really do think it's an upgrade into coaching, but it's not a slam dunk that he's going to be a great coach.
And you guys...
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think it's an upgrade in bringing prominence to the franchise.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think Trevor Lawrence will do well. I think all of the first-round quarterbacks from this year look good. I am, cards on the table, a Bears fan, so I don't get excited for anything because the Bears' success comes when you don't expect it, and when you do expect it, they fall on their faces. So I do think Justin Fields, their quarterback they traded up for, could be something special.
You think he's going to start, or you think?
I think they'll stick with Dalton for the first couple weeks. I mean, I'm not on the bandwagon like everybody else. This is a new NFL. Not new. It's been this way for the last 5-10 years. But guys don't get time to develop. You mentioned New York and quarterbacks. I'm not sure if you mean Zach Wilson, the Jets rookie, or Daniel Jones,
both
the Giants third-year guy. Well, everybody, including myself, because it's the truth, has written this is a pivotal season for Daniel Jones, but it's like this is his third year. He's been starting since he's a rookie, but he's never had a full season as a starter because of injuries and because his rookie season he took over for Eli. But guys don't really get time to develop. A lot of that is the rookie contract structure and wanting to take advantage of the rookie contracts and being able to put talent around them. But it's very much not for long. Jerry Glanville said that a long time ago, but it's truer than ever. It's all about the quarterback in a lot of instances, but in the same it really isn't because you need to build around them. So you need to take advantage of that window that you have a great quarterback. So there's none of the first-round quarterbacks this year where I'm like, I don't think he's going to do well. I really think that Mac Jones in New England is the guy that probably has the most doubters, but he's looked pretty good so far. So the season, I think it's a wide open ball game, but I think everybody leans towards, hey, the Chiefs and the Bucks are the best again. And for me, I think the Chiefs are the front runner.
So you guys all go on record to say that Trevor Lawrence is going to do really well.
I don't think he's going to do really well. I think he's a safe bet.
Mm-hmm.
I did a lot of research before the draft, and I wish I had it here in front of me. But, what do you think is really good for a number one overall pick? Is it a Hall of Famer? Is it a guy that wins a Super Bowl with that team that drafted him? And there's not a lot of guys that have done that,
Yeah, I mean, my friend Gene Fournette of the Jacksonville, Florida Times Union, he said that he predicted that the Jaguars would win between 7 and 10 games. I think that's optimistic, but I think if Trevor, what did they win last year? One game,
Yeah,
2 games.
that's how they got Trevor.
Yeah, and I think if they win 6 or 7 games, it would be a great season for them. I think that he's got to stay healthy. He's got Minshew, snapping at his heels, but I don't think Minshew's going to catch him for a backup quarterback. But I think if he stays healthy and he makes progress and they start winning toward the second half of the season, he'll be a good quarterback. The future is out on him because he's got to have a prolonged career of 5 or 10 years to say he's a good quarterback. But I think he's got a shot. He's got a shot at that, and the Jaguars are putting pieces around him. So he may win 7 games. I don't think he win 10, Gene, but that's just my opinion.
Well, that means they would go 7 and 10, and that will be my prediction as the biggest thing that people will need to get used to this year is the records.
Yep.
Because somebody will go 7 and 10 or 8 and 9. There's no more 8 and 8 and 10 and 6, and it's going to take us a long time to get used to an odd number for a final record, unless somebody becomes the first team to go 8 and 1, which will just be really weird.
Yep. Anything else, Billy?
Just real quick, before you go, and this is a one-word answer almost. Well, not a one-word, 2-word answer. What fight would I have to see to make me an MMA fan? Like to make me
any fight in history or any?
Yeah, anyone that Billy. If you saw this fight, there's no way you wouldn't be a fan of this sport.
The girl fight.
I would go Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonner 1, the Ultimate Fighter finale. History says that's the fight that introduced a lot of people to the sport and they tuned in. So it's a really exciting fight and it goes everywhere. It's bloody.
Give it to me
fun.
one more time. I'm going to write it down and watch it.
Forrest Griffin.
Okay.
Stephan Bonner, the Ultimate Fighter 1.
Okay.
What about the fight between, is it Joanna
Jędrzejczyk and
the girl from China?
Yeah, that was that last year or this year? I think it was 2020.
I think so.
That was phenomenal. Yeah.
That's another one.
Zhang Yi, was it?
I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay. She recently lost to Rose Namajunas, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that is one thing that I worry about is just the oversaturation because there are so many cards. It makes it more difficult for stars to emerge, but they will. And there is actually a lot of crossover with mixed martial arts and professional wrestling where, their histories overlap with, Antonio Inoki and Sakuraba and on and on and on. But they're both defined by stars and their peaks and valleys. And I'm so confident that, everybody... It happened in boxing, too. Everybody said boxing is dead a zillion times, and it never died, and it never will.
Yeah.
And we'll just have stars emerge. And a lot of things, too, is, I don't want to say it's nationalism, but, we're Americans. We live in America. We think predominantly what is going on here. And there's guys that flourish across the world in different sports and are massive stars. I mean, you know, you talk about McGregor being so huge in Ireland. I personally have never been there, but McGregor fights in Vegas, you know, of course, pre-pandemic, you know, you would hear stories about how the Irish took over the town.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't drive on the strip. There was just Irish people, happy as can be, all decked out in green, you know, drinking it up, celebrating before, after the fight. And
wait, they were drinking, the Irish? Are you sure these were Irish or imposters?
It shocked
They sound
everybody.
like imposters.
It shocked everybody.
It's like Ricky Hatton and the British. But
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah.
Great point. Yeah. I think McGregor is bigger.
Yeah.
But Hatton was the same way. Like, you know, he brought the Irish, and that's something that you see in fighting that is just ridiculous when you see people fighting in the United States, and yet a crowd is taken over by people from the home country of the popular fighter. It's crazy.
I want to tell you a quick story before we go. It's quick because I'm going to say goodbye to you after this.
Okay.
Al Michaels was doing Monday Night Football, and he was driving to the game with Howard Cosell, and along the streets there was a fight broke out, and Howard Cosell got out and he did a blow-by-blow for the street fight.
That's terrific.
And now Al Michaels loves to tell that story about Howard Cosell did a blow-by-blow for the street fight.
that's hilarious.
Grant, you've been a great guest.
Terrific
I can't
guest.
tell you-
Appreciate it.
I can't
Really
tell you how
great
much.
guest. Pleasure meeting you, pal.
We'll have you back for sure.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
brother.
Have a good one.
Enjoyed meeting you. Thanks for smartening me up about the sport.
Me too.
Anytime. Anytime.
Me too. Good talking to you, pal.
Have a good one.
So, Billy, pretty good, huh?
Oh, he was a great interview. And like I said, I don't know much about mixed martial arts, but I'm certainly going to check out that fight. And I mean, it was very, very interesting.
Yeah, it actually went a little. There's Catalina again. God damn it.
There's my cousin. Hey,
There's your
my
cousin again. God damn it.
There's my cousin Billy.
Where's a Mick and a
Hey,
Mike?
you know what? McGregor met his match when he met a Cork man. I'll tell you that. This guy's from Cork. He's not going to get by easy on him.
Well, hey, there it is. Before we go,
You know nobody else can see that, but you guys.
Oh.
Just so you know.
before we go, this week we gave away the George Lopez bobblehead. It went to Shelly Brand-Tager in Florida. So congratulations, Shelly Brand-Tager in Florida. I'll get this out to you soon.
Nice. So we gave away the bobblehead. That's beautiful.
And we should mention again, can we get our coffee logo up? Weekendcoffee.com. There it is.
There it is.
Premium blends right to your door. And again, talk about next week, because we're going to have Richie on and what Richie means to America. Richie was the 9/11 guy.
9/11 first responder who survived the collapse. He was
Right.
one of the few guys that walked out of the building. And he wrote a book about it called Last Man Down. And just to get the sense of what it was like to be inside that building and hear that roar, that's going to be graphic enough. I mean,
Yeah.
it's going to be very interesting.
It'll be a great interview.
I want to close with something, because I got to tell you, when you guys both nailed me and said, for Billy doesn't know what a troll is, and I compared it to a shit stirrer, let me tell you a story, real quick story. I know what a shit stirrer is, because when I was in the Army, I was one time
latrine duty.
that was the detail that I got. I was the shit stirrer, and I said, I don't even know what this means, but when you go out on bivouac,
Yeah.
of course, you got a couple of hundred men, and they dig holes, and they put 55-gallon drums in there, and you do your business in the 55-gallon drums. Well, after they're done, they set fire to the 55-gallon drums, and lo and behold, somebody has to stir the shit. And I was the shit stirrer. So I know what a shit stirrer is.
Wow. Yeah. That's not a really good transition to anything.
No, Frank, but it was an unforgettable moment.
But let's go back to the let's go back to the first responders.
Yeah.
Because next week we're going to do a 9/11 show, and Weekend Coffee donates 1 bag of coffee for every 10 sold to first
responders
Yeah.
and to veterans,
And
which
veterans.
is which is great. And we started the show at the top with a lament towards our veterans that suffered in Afghanistan. Of course, it's got to be a horrible feeling for anybody who lost a limb or something over there to see us pull out like that. So
Anyway, pull out it is.
yes, it is. And thank you very much for looking in again. And the support has been through the roof, and we both appreciate it.
We all appreciate it, all three of us.
All three of us, yeah, more than we could ever expect. So thanks very much for tuning in, and we're going to try and stay diverse and stay apolitical if we can.
Well, we'll present both sides of the spectrum, that's for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Derek. Say goodnight, Billy.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you very much, Frank.
Guys.
Appreciate it. And he was a great guest, Frank. Thanks
Great.
for having him on.
Next week's guest, highest-ranking firefighter to survive the 9/11 collapse of the World Trade Center, Richard Picciotto.